While most presidents wore suit jackets, ties, and dress pants all the time, you don't have to any longer. Because Presidents Unplugged has merch. If you want to check out some new shirts to buy as a nice gift for somebody in your family or just something that you want yourself, go to presidentsunpluggedmerch.com to check out new shirts, hoodies, crew necks, and anything else that you can dream of. Now in many more colors and new designs coming soon. I'm very excited for the Presidents Unplugged merch store to finally be open. Now, let's get back to the show. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Presidents Unplugged. I'm Ty Svensson, and today we're going to be talking about Ulysses S. Grant, the Civil War hero who became the president and overcame a lot in the way to get there. Let's get started. Born on April 27th, 1822, born Hiram Ulysses Grant, he was a normal kid with the name Hiram Ulysses Grant. But if your initials are HUG or HUG, he was bullied for it. He was bullied as a child, nicknamed Useless Grant, even though that is clever, I can't deny it is rude. He was bullied as a child. He was quiet, he was stoic, he was kind of reserved. He wasn't out there. But after going through school and finishing off his high school time, he went to West Point, the military academy, and a military general would change his life forever. They mistakenly didn't call him Hiram Ulysses Grant. They accidentally called him Ulysses S. Grant. Grant liked this name change so much that he decided to keep it. And from now on, he was known as Ulysses S. Grant. So, just like with Harry S. Truman, the S does not stand for a name. In Grant's case, it actually stands for nothing. But let's get into these presidential terms. Wait, hold on a second. Yet again, I have some stuff to cover. Grant was not immediately catapulted into politics. He was first brought into the American story in the Mexican-American War, where he fought in some battles, and I'm going to be completely straight with you. I could make this whole entire episode off the battles that Ulysses Grant fought in the Mexican-American War and the Civil War. But I didn't want to go into depth because this episode could be an hour long. And in Presidents Unplugged fashion, we got to get this done in 15 minutes. So, I had a special guest, not on the episode with us, but give me some ideas. In June of 2024, I went on a trip where I went to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, with a group called Lead with Character. It's a foundation that my dad found through a friend, and we went there and found this awesome tour guide named Steve May. But this man was more than a tour guide. This Lead with Character trip to Gettysburg showed how Christian men can lead, and he showed these traits through stories of the Civil War, and it was awesome. So, funny enough, I saw him at a Bible study just last week, and I said, Steve, instead of going into this intimate detail, what are 3 words that you would use to describe Ulysses Grant's war days? And he gave me these 3. The first word he gave me was tenacity. These are all 3 bigger words, so I'm going to explain them. Tenacity is staying committed through hardship. There was a lot of hardship in the wars that Grant was in, whether that's the Mexican-American War or the Civil War, but he fought through them, and he stayed committed through it all. The second word he gave me was stubbornness. Similar to tenacity, stubbornness is he stuck to the beliefs that he had. He was strong in what he believed, and this dedication would show in his war times, but He was dedicated even when it would hurt him later, which showed how strong he was in what he believed. And the third word that he gave me, I looked at him with open eyes, and it's our word of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Presidents Unplugged's word of the day, magnanimous. Magnanimous means generous, forgiving, especially towards someone who is below you or have wronged you. The story that comes to mind when talking about how magnanimous Ulysses Grant was is right after the Civil War, when Robert E. Lee and Ulysses Grant met up at the Appomattox Courthouse, which we saw on our Gettysburg trip, by the way. They met up at Appomattox Courthouse right after the end of the Civil War, and they talked it out. Grant could have taken Robert E. Lee and hung him for being a traitor towards the country. That's what a lot of people wanted Grant to do. But Grant, instead of taking that stance, said, "It's okay. We forgive you." Instead of responding with anger and kind of disappointment, Grant responded with, "It's okay." He treated somebody who had wronged him more than anyone. Robert E. Lee, the general of the whole entire Confederate Army. He could have done awful things to Robert E. Lee for what he had done, but he didn't. He treated him with respect and honored him, even though he had done so much wrong. And that is what makes Ulysses Grant so special. How his enemies, people who had wronged him, he didn't approach them immediately with anger. He approached them with a magnanimous love that had never been seen before. And that's what makes Grant's description of these three words mean so much. Grant was not just another soldier. He was a hero. But now that we're about 6 minutes into the episode, I told you I wasn't going to go way into the battles because this is Presidents Unplugged, not Battles Unplugged. So let's get into Grant's presidency. 1868, Grant runs for his first term. 3 years after Lincoln's assassination on April 15th, 1865, Ulysses Grant had just seen Andrew Johnson be president. Andrew Johnson, can't wait for his episode, he was not good. He was impeached. He didn't go out of office, but he was impeached. He did some very cruel, kind of shady stuff. So, can't wait for the Andrew Johnson episode. But Ulysses Grant in 1868 ran with this campaign slogan, "Let us have peace." We had had a civil war, an impeached president. Yeah, that's not a lot of peace. Let us have peace. That was his campaign slogan. Not only did his campaign slogan win him the presidency, but also his popularity won him. And overall, he was reliable. People knew who he was. And it would show, as we look into this episode, he was the first president to have a full 2-term presidency since Andrew Jackson, which is the 7th president. Grant was the 18th president. That's a long time. So let's dive into some of the big highlights from Grant's presidency. First, I'm going to talk about Reconstruction. It's a term that's thrown around after the Civil War that we need to know. We as Americans need to know. After the Civil War, it was, if you don't know, the Civil War was very unfairly treating the African Americans and the slaves. But Reconstruction was the act to make them come back to normal lives. They had just been in awful conditions in the slavery days of the Americas. And even though Grant at one time in his life had been given a slave, he gave it up because somewhere deep inside he felt it was wrong. So for his entire presidency, he pushed for civil rights. And he signed the 15th Amendment that said you could not be told if you could vote or not from your skin color, giving African American men the right to vote. Even though women wouldn't get that right for another 50 or so years, this was a big step in the right direction. Now, here's the sad thing about Reconstruction. While Grant pushed it super hard, the president after him, Rutherford B. Hayes, ended Reconstruction overall, which caused some struggles between the African American and the white community all the way until the civil rights movements in the 1960s. So even though Grant pushed for this movement in the right direction. Sadly, just after his terms, it would fade away and wouldn't really be fixed in that regard until the 1960s with the advances of the civil rights movement. We had seen the South secede from the Union. We're mad at them, right? No. Grant made a big effort to rebuild the South. They had so much destruction and corruption over the Civil War. He built them back to be stronger. And another big thing about Reconstruction is the reconstruction of the South. All that was broken, he attempted to fix, and did some great things to keep the South what we know it as today, rebuilt. Those are great things. The way he rebuilt with Reconstruction is probably the highlight of his terms. Looking back at it, it was one of the best things he did over his whole entire life. It was great. But there was a tiny bit of problems, especially around his second term, and that was corruption. While George Washington himself might not have had an Instagram page, Presidents Unplugged does. If you want to see some presidential content and overall updates on the show, come to the Instagram at Presidents_Unplugged. See you there. Ulysses Grant was very trustworthy. He trusted the people he worked with all the time, and that included his cabinet. Now, was his cabinet the best people he should have been listening to? Here's the problem. He trusted too many people. His cronies in his government that told him very awful things to do, poor decisions, they made bad decisions and blamed it on Grant. Also known as corruption. The corruption in the government at the time of Ulysses Grant's presidency was insane. And as we even do today, this corruption rubbed off on the president, and people think today, oh, it was all Grant's fault, even though it wasn't. So I feel bad for Grant in that mark, because people remember his presidency for corruption and failures, even though it wasn't really his fault. So, with this scandals and corruption, he had a harsh end to his presidencies. 8 years in office, with great things with Reconstruction, but tarnished by the corruption from his friends. It wasn't even Grant's fault, which is one of the saddest things about the presidential position. Sometimes it's not all that you do that makes people mad, but it's what your friends do. So what did he do after his presidency? Well, he kind of went the Teddy Roosevelt route and toured the world. Now, when he toured the world, he didn't get reminded of all this corruption during his terms. He was treated with respect. Leadership respect. They didn't know him as that president that was so corrupt. They knew him as a war hero, which was awesome. It gave him a breath of fresh air. But little did he know that breath of fresh air would not last long, as after he came back to the States, he contracted a type of throat cancer. Now, I don't mean to make light of a situation, but I made this little research, and I just wanted to make it clear. The last words of presidents are sometimes poetic, like John Adams's "Thomas Jefferson survives." So last words are often famous lines from presidents, but Ulysses Grant's final word was water. Man, that's just sad. A man with throat cancer's last word, water. But he thought, in the future, he was prepared. After he contracted throat cancer, Grant was not doing very well. And he didn't want to leave his family with nothing. Because even though we as the American people think, oh, the presidents are always so rich, really, when looking back, not all of them were. So Grant had to do something to make sure his family was going to be okay. So he did. Him and his buddy Mark Twain, yeah, I'm not joking, him and his buddy Mark Twain worked together to publish a memoir of Grant's life. So, in the final days of Grant's life, he wrote a memoir of his life, not for his own wealth in the future, but to leave his family with something, which is awesome. Him looking out for his family shows his real personality and his real love for the people around him. So he wrote this awesome memoir and Mark Twain published it, and this book didn't sell for like $100 or whatever. This memoir selling ended up making his family around $480,000. Now that money today is pretty incredible, but adjusted for inflation, this book made Ulysses Grant's family about $13 million in today's money. So Grant, at the end of his life, made one decision to write a book, and it ended up making his family secure and financially stable for generations to come. I always like to add at the end of these episodes what we can learn from the specific president's life and their presidency. What I have learned from the Ulysses Grant story is that you need to fight for what's right. And in that fight, you need to never give up. Grant in his life could have given up so many times, and he would have never succeeded like he did. Keep on fighting and don't give up, because in the end, you'll be known as a real hero. And that is the reason why Ulysses Grant's life and presidency are so important. Tune in next Friday as we talk about Grover Cleveland. Double trouble. 2 terms. Not back-to-back. Non-consecutive. Yes, our current president, Donald Trump, is 2 non-consecutive terms. But that other president guy you hear about with 2 non-consecutive terms? Grover Cleveland. Great man, right? A man with illegitimate children? Scandal? White House marriage? Figure out that and much more next week on Presidents Unplugged. I'll see you there. God bless. We need to make an executive decision now. The executive decision to follow Presidents Unplugged on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today to be notified weekly that your favorite presidential podcast has released new content. Now, let's get back to the show.